Those timeless American principles did not just win a revolution, but they built us into the greatest, strongest, and most exceptional nation the world has ever known. There has never been anything like the United States of America, and together we are making it bigger and better and stronger and far more exceptional than ever before.
History teaches us something very profound. The greatness of America has never been that it was born perfect. Its greatness has rested upon its capacity to become better. Every generation has been asked a single question: will you enlarge the promise or will you shrink it? That question confronts us today.
That was President Donald Trump, followed by Illinois Democratic U.S. Representative Jonathan Jackson, seeming to show the stark contrast of praise for the country's founding, but seeing different outcomes in the modern era. American voters overwhelmingly support their country's founding ideals, yet the majority also believe the U.S. is failing to live up to them, according to new polling data. Joining us to delve deeper into some of the latest from the Center Square's Voters' Voice poll is the Center Square reporter, Therese Boudreaux. Therese, thanks for taking time with us, and happy Independence Day. Noble Predictive Insights asked over 2,500 registered voters about support for founding principles like life, liberty, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the right to bear arms, equal treatment under the law, and government by the consent of the people. What did they find?
Well, happy Independence Day to you too. They found that there is overwhelming support for those. 86% of all registered voters surveyed said that they support those founding principles. And that went across demographic lines, across the gender divide, across political parties. So it is this 250th anniversary. There still is widespread belief in these founding principles of America.
You know, as we look at, again, that breakout of strongly somewhat opposed, it's clear, very weighted towards having some kind of support for those founding principles. You touched briefly on, how it kind of different demographics seem to all kind of also agree. Talk about those demographics. How did they address that question?
Right. Well, in most polls, for instance, there's usually quite a difference between male and female voters and among voters from different areas, so suburban, urban, rural. But for this issue, the gaps were virtually non-existent. So you had over 80% of support for male and female voters across the demographic or the geographic spectrum, which again is very rare to see in a poll. Also, among the American political groups, support never went below 79%. So 89% of Republicans, 85% of Democrats, and 79% of independents all support it. Even racially, where again we usually see a divide among the different racial groups, support for all of them never went below 73%. So that's whites, Hispanics, blacks, and then other races. Those were the four categories. So we can see, and generations too. It's interesting because, again, support never went under 70%, but the older that the voters got, the higher their support was. So the oldest senior voters had 95% support.
Oh, wow.
And so we see that the support increasing progressively with the age of voters, and then with education and income too. So the absolute highest support is from voters who are on the older side, who are financially well off, and who are well educated. But with all of that being said, there's still widespread agreement and support for these principles.
Now, you talked with Mike Noble of Noble Predictive Insights, who conducted the poll. He said there was a big disconnect. What was that big disconnect?
Right. So despite there being widespread support, the big disconnect is that the views on how well these principles are being practiced are pretty dismal. About 2/3, just under 2/3 of all voters surveyed said they believe that the founding principles are not being practiced well, which is huge, right? And he was saying how that disconnect really kind of shows some pessimism among voters. And again, this, it's only 31% believe that they're being practiced somewhat well or slightly well. And that includes only 44% of Republicans. So only 44% of Republicans who, again, their party's in power right now, believe that those principles are being practiced well. And again, kind of in a reverse, the divides between race and gender, they're a little bit pronounced, but again, not quite as pronounced as most other polls. So we see this kind of universal, almost universal support, and then almost, maybe not almost universal, but a very pessimistic belief in these founding principles being practiced. Again, what is interesting though is that the higher that the income and education level are, the more hope that voters have that these, or the more belief that they have that these principles are being practiced well. It's a very interesting poll. Again, there's a lot of, the results are dissimilar to many polls in those ways, and in the ways that we see support fluctuate, unlike, usually polls for political candidates, for instance. So it's very interesting to see that, and to see kind of how widespread this belief in the ideals, but pessimism in their practice is.
Well, and the polling also found that between Trump voters and Harris voters, only 17% of voters who voted for Harris held a hopeful view, while 47% of those who voted for Trump held that view. And you write that Republicans and Democrats at the congressional level frequently clashing over how to protect these ideals, and they accuse the other party of violating them. Here's Democratic U.S. Representative James McGovern this week talking about the founding principles.
The truth is that right now, too many people feel like this country is run of, by, and for the powerful, the wealthy, and the well-connected. And you know what? They're right. People see the corruption, the greed, the self-dealing, and the self-enrichment of this president's family and his crooked administration, and they are fed up with it. And I believe that patriotism means calling your country to a higher standard. Patriotism means telling the truth, Mr. Speaker. And the truth is Americans are hurting. Costs are too high, and our democracy and freedoms are under assault by an out-of-control, lawless administration run by a president who thinks he's a king.
So what have Republicans been saying? That was a Democrat. What have Republicans been saying about the founding principles and adherence to those principles?
Well, again, I mean, there's a Republican trifecta in power right now in the U.S. And so generally, if we're talking about Republican leadership, at least in Congress, most of the policies that are coming out of the Trump administration, they say are good and are reflective of these principles. So, for instance, the Trump administration ending some of the DEI funding for DEI projects in foreign aid and under the Department of Education. Republicans see that as upholding, sometimes freedom of speech or freedom of association. Oftentimes they'll cite, whereas Democrats will say, but it's the opposite. They'll say, or for instance, we see in these ICE protests, right? So Republicans, these Republican leaders don't really see an issue with there not being a judicial warrant required for ICE to arrest migrants who are in the country illegally. But whereas Democrats say that is a violation of due process. So that may explain, Noble was saying, some of the discrepancies, because while 86% of voters say, oh, I support freedom of speech, I support freedom of assembly, etc., they disagree on what exactly that looks like. And so Republicans right now, Republican lawmakers, I should specify, they're pretty supportive of what the Trump administration is doing. They're not exactly taking to the floor like McGovern and saying that the Trump administration is, violating the Constitution,
corrupt
etc.
or a king.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, right. And which is, that's what we would expect. Right. But Democrats definitely are. And, Republicans in the last Biden administration, just flip the sides. They were saying the exact same things. Democrats didn't have a problem really, most of them with the vaccine mandates, or effectively mandates. Republicans said that is an absolute constitutional violation. So again, we kind of see that reflected in the voting bloc. Although, again, with only 44% of Republicans being hopeful, but does definitely show, maybe they're not quite as hopeful as their elected leaders are. But again,
definitely
very interesting
a very
results.
timely poll, especially here on the eve of the Independence Day holiday. Therese Boudreaux with the Center Square. Happy Independence Day to you. And this is The States. From my studio in Central Illinois, I'm Greg Bishop. Happy Independence Day to all of you, and join us back here next week for more stories impacting the taxpayer from all across the country, only with The States, powered by the Center Square.